Anyway, speaking at the opening ceremony this morning, King Charles did warn we aren't on track to meet our climate goals. But many are accusing the monarch of hypocrisy as he jetted off to Dubai to scold us for our carbon-intensive lifestyles. Some might argue, and I've seen this in the inbox, that, you know, how else was he going to get there?
He could have swum.
He could have swum, perhaps.
No, I'm not sure. Well, how did people used to get about? I mean, there's the Orient Express. Does that still run? That would be wonderful.
Well, presumably it used to run on coal.
That's true. But that would be a majestic way. There could be a royal carriage.
It could be a royal
carriage. And Prince Charles could have spent a month and a half getting to the Middle East. I mean, that would have been a statement. Greta Thunberg, after all, sailed across the Atlantic.
She did.
But then the 3 people who sailed that boat had to fly to and from it to make sure that they could get that boat sailed just for her PR stunt.
And we wonder why people think climate summits are all about virtue signalling. But anyway, perhaps not. With us now is GB News Royal Correspondent Cameron Walker. Cameron, we know that the King is passionate when it comes to the environment and climate change. He said quite a lot in that speech. Stark warnings. Was it bordering on the political?
Well, it's certainly a passion of King Charles. It's been over half a century now. He's been singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to talking to the world about climate urgency, that time is running out, etc., etc. And of course, King Charles has this global presence where people around the world do tend to take him seriously. Of course, he is lucky in the sense that he has Queen Elizabeth II, his mother's influence kind of in him, I suppose. On the one hand, it is a passion of his, and perhaps he could influence some political people around the world when it comes to changing climate policy. But of course, the King has to be above politics, doesn't he? He cannot be party political. He cannot shape policy. But an interesting theme which he has touched on before is this sense of the public and private sectors working together. And he urged in his speech that private finance really needs to work in tandem with governments around the world to really make a difference. Now, one of the criticisms of King Charles when it comes to climate change and talking about climate change is perhaps he's slightly too pessimistic and too urgent when it comes to talking about these kind of issues, which does sometimes switch people off and make them not really want to make any kind of difference. In contrast to his son, the Prince of Wales, with his Earthshot Prize, for example, finding solutions to repair our planets within a decade. With the Prince of Wales, Prince William, it's all about being optimistic and finding genuine solutions.
Yes, I was going to ask you about this, because, of course, you've travelled alongside the Prince of Wales when he went off to Boston, that technological city, I suppose, where MIT and Harvard and great minds come together, and he's trying to find these new technological solutions. Of course, it was only last week or earlier this week that we had the first, sustainable aviation fuel flight.
Oh, yes.
So not banning planes, but finding a better way to fuel them. Is that a contrast, therefore, in your view, between the Prince of Wales and the King? The King saying, oh, we need to stop doing all of these things, and the Prince saying, actually, we can still live a wonderful, technological, forward-looking life, but through technological innovation.
Yeah, I think it's quite an obvious contrast, but I think they both share the same passion, and that is to try and create a better environmentally friendly world. I mean, you talk about sustainable aviation fuel there, Tom. It was actually King Charles on his trip to Kenya that insisted the RAF Voyager contained at least some sustainable aircraft fuel when it was transporting the King, Queen, the journalists and all the royal household to Kenya. So he got there in front of that transatlantic flight last week. But of course, with the royal family, it wasn't King Charles that started talking about climate change and sustainability first. It was Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, when he kind of helped to set up WWF. So it does have some history with that family. But of course, there is a big difference between the way King Charles and Prince William speaks about climate change. But it's Rishi Sunak, really, isn't it? He's the guy who can change policy in the United Kingdom. But I think a big question is, actually, is King Charles going to have more influence on the world stage, or is Rishi Sunak, who's a bigger figure?
That's very interesting. And of course, Cameron, this may have been a bit of an escape for our monarch, for King Charles, because, of course, there have been this bombshell book that's been published this week with all of these allegations. It must be quite nice for King Charles to talk about something he's passionate about away from Britain, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it certainly is. It's been a cloud hanging over Buckingham Palace for the last few days. A royal source told me last night that they are considering all options when it comes to how to respond to those two names, the King and the Princess of Wales, being named in the Dutch version of Omid Scobie's book Endgame. Allegedly, they were having conversations about the colour of Harry and Meghan's unborn son's skin. But of course, Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, as of yet, have not commented on that. There's three options, really, I think, for the palaces. Either they stay silent, as they have done with all the scandals of the last few years when it comes to Harry and Meghan antics, or they release some kind of statement, like the late Queen did after the Oprah interview, where she released that now famous statement saying recollections may vary, or they take legal action. But when I put it to Buckingham Palace last night, well, what kind of action are you going to be taking and against who? Is it Omid Scobie, the author? Is it the publishers of a Dutch edition? Or is it indeed a well-known television personality in the UK who broke it first in the United Kingdom? Or Harry and Meghan themselves? And that question remains unanswered this afternoon.
That would be a bombshell, wouldn't it? Were Kensington Palace or indeed Buckingham Palace to start suing Harry and Meghan Incorporated? My goodness.
Not an easy decision to make.
No, I would imagine they would probably want to steer away from doing that, perhaps.
I suspect so. Perhaps silence is the right way to go. But thank you very much indeed, Cameron Walker, GB News Royal Correspondent.